Many familiar names on here. It's so wonderful to be here with everyone tonight. Good evening, I'm Molly Taggart. For those of you I don't know, the Executive Director of the Georgia chapter. Thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful that you decided to tune in and help us normalize the conversation around mental health. This can be a hard topic to discuss and navigate, but we believe that it is a critical component of our overall health and should be given the same attention that we would give to any other health-related issue. The past year has been difficult for everyone, to say the least. We know that the CF community in particular has taken great care to guard against COVID-19. And we also know that doing this has taken a toll. We all have experienced loss this year. We know that many people have lost their sense of normalcy, lost things that may bring them joy, lost things that help us cope in everyday anxiety and depression. For these reasons and many more, we saw a real need in our community to discuss this topic. I hope that each of you leaves here feeling hopeful for the future. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Danielle. She will share a few housekeeping items and introduce the real stars of this event, our panel. Danielle?
Thank you, Molly, and good evening, everybody. I'm so glad that all of you are here. In case I haven't met you yet, I am a development director here at the foundation, and I have the privilege of working on Great Strides, and also get to manage our virtual events. So that's how this event was brought to you this evening. And if you like this kind of stuff, we would love to hear your feedback. So feel free to let us know in the comments how you feel about our virtual programming. First, I'm gonna, like Molly said, just share a couple of housekeeping items with you. Just keep in mind that the conversation around mental health can be difficult, and our panelists are going to share intimate details about their own experience with you through their mental health journey. So we understand that some of this discussion may bring up feelings or emotions that you may need help dealing with, and that's part of why we're doing this. So we urge you to contact your care team or your care center's mental health coordinator for anything that you may need help navigating. So tonight, our panel is going to be led by our mental health coordinator at Emory University's CF Adult Clinic and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta's Children's CF Center. Shayna is our resident expert on this topic. She received her Bachelor of Science in Social Work from Howard Payne University and received her Master's in Social Work from Baylor University. And she has over 10 years of experience working with adults and children, families, in community and medical settings. She's able to just develop a quick rapport with patients and works collaboratively with healthcare teams to make sure that our families and patients with CF have the highest quality care that they deserve. So we're so glad to have her as the expert with us this evening. If you have any questions for Shayna, we would love to invite you to chat those in using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to set aside some time at the very end to answer all of your questions. And then those that we may not be able to get to tonight, we'll definitely reach out directly to you. So feel free to utilize the chat tonight. All right, so now I get the pleasure of taking a moment to introduce our panel. And we have 4 panelists that are just incredible. They're incredible members of our CF community, and I'm just thrilled that they're here. Thank you all for spending your time with us tonight. And I'm excited for the entire community to hear from you. So first, I'm going to start with Meg Lindsay. Meg is our resident new mom on the panel. She and her husband, Andrew, are parents to the incredibly cute Sid. He is the CF fighter. And Sid was born in February of last year, right before the pandemic started. And as you can imagine, that is not an easy time to become a new mom, just in general, but especially with a CF diagnosis. So on top of a worldwide pandemic, Meg has just really navigated motherhood in a beautiful and gracious way. Sid was admitted to the hospital when he was just 5 weeks old and had a rough start, but he's doing really great now. He's growing and changing right before our eyes, and it's just fun to be a part of their family and watching them navigate this journey. I know you're going to enjoy hearing from her new mom perspective tonight. She brings such a great perspective on how to deal with a new diagnosis, how to lean on her family and her friends for support, and how to be okay in grief without staying there too long. So she's going to bring some really great information to our panel, and we're thrilled to have you, Meg. Thank you for being here. Next, I'm going to introduce Erin Sprinkle. Erin and her husband, Daryl have 2 kids, Joseph and Caleb. And Caleb, their youngest, has CF. Erin is a middle school counselor, and she so beautifully shares her struggles with mental health journey and also her successes. Erin has been in this fight for 11 years now and has been an integral part of our community just year after year. I just really can't wait for you to hear from her own perspective what her experience has been like. And we know she has a lot of details and a lot of expertise to share with us. Erin's going to talk about some of the trauma of a new CF diagnosis and how that stays with her even to this day, despite all the advances in treatment and the hope that is in this community. And she'll also share about family dynamics, how CF affects their family as a whole, with a sibling without CF. She'll share family dynamics along those lines. So we are thrilled to have Erin with us tonight. Thank you for being here, Erin. Next, we have Caroline Starnes. Caroline is an adult with CF. She was diagnosed at birth and, of course, has beat all the odds. She's now 42 years old. Caroline is unique on this panel in the fact that she is not eligible for any of the CFTR modulators like Trikafta. And we've seen those really changing people's lives, especially over the last year. And she is not eligible for that, but she remains hopeful every day. And I just love her point of view and her openness to share how that affects her mentally. So we're going to have some really great conversation with Caroline on how that makes her feel and how it affects her mental health. Of course, there's much more to Caroline, and she will graciously share all of that with us tonight. But thank you, Caroline, for being here. And just know that we are not done fighting for you and for others until we have a cure. And then last, but certainly not least, I'm proud to introduce Andy Littman. Many of you already know Andy, as he is a prominent figure in our CF community. Andy is an adult living with CF, and he was, of course, diagnosed at birth and has an incredible story of resilience and just beating the odds and fighting for himself every single day. Admittedly, he'll tell you it's not always easy, and he really does work really hard at his care. But he will share his perspective on being so public with his health journey and his unique perspective of being a parent with CF. He'll talk about how this journey impacts his children and in turn, his mental health and theirs. So thank you to all of our panelists. We really have an amazing group. And I will just turn it over to Shana now. And she'll kick it off. So Shana, the floor is all yours.
Hi everyone, I am just adjusting here for a minute to share my screen with you all. Here we go. Well, thank you to the Georgia chapter for hosting this community event and for inviting me to be a part of it. I'm glad to be here with the panelists and with all of you who are watching. This is our program for tonight. I'll share a presentation on mental health and CF. And then we'll get to the real highlight of the evening, which is our panel discussion, have time for open Q&A, have some input from those of you listening. And then at the end, we'll share some resources at our closing. In preparing for this event, I asked Andy, Caroline, Erin, and Meg what they might hope for all of you watching by the end of the hour. And these were their thoughts. Gain a sense of community, or connection to community, hear parts of your own story and another person's story, know you're not alone, see examples of adults with CF who are living full lives, be encouraged to connect with resources to support you. So these are very briefly my objectives. I'm going to really keep an eye on the time because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion for our panel and describe and define mental health, identify factors influencing mental health, look at this, what it means specifically in CF, and introduce recommendations for mental health care. So why talk about mental health? The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Mental health is an integral part of health, and certainly there's no health without mental health. So based on this definition, mental health is essential to overall health and well-being. So over the last year, we've received lots of messaging about mental health through national and social media more than ever before. Some of that may have been helpful and some of it may be less so or possibly even inaccurate. So for clarity, it's helpful to define mental health more specifically. So mental health is a state of well-being where an individual can realize abilities, cope with the stresses of life, work productively, find a source of meaning in their productivity, and contribute to his or her community. Again, more than the absence of a diagnosis, it's determined by socioeconomic, biological, and environmental factors. So these range of factors include, so looking at all of these domains, social factors, so things like culture, community, belonging to a racial or ethnic group. Biological, we talk a lot about genetics and cystic fibrosis. This has implications in mental health as well. Brain physiology, the impact of infection or systemic inflammation. Thinking about the psychological domain, things like personality and temperament, beliefs, values. And then environmental, those surrounding physical conditions, things like environmental exposure and health disparities. So those things in our healthcare system, those structures or economic policies that may more negatively impact certain groups of people. In 2010, a study published in CHEST looking at CF data, which included 4,700 patients and 1,800 parents, determined that low socioeconomic status was associated with significantly lower quality of life scores. After controlling for disease severity and socioeconomic status, African American and Hispanic patients reported worse emotional and social functioning. So I share this really to demonstrate that there is a relationship happening between all of these domains. And the presence of a mental health complication is often better explained by circular causality or that relationship happening where each of these factors impact each other. So often, mental health is associated with a negative label or a feeling of stigma. And so, as you can see, looking at these domains and these factors, while there are some parts of health and mental health we can control and influence, there are other factors that are much less within our personal control. And fostering mental wellness in an individual or in a community means targeting more than one of these domains. So what are we talking about really specifically? It can be helpful to think about mental health along a spectrum. Experiencing some degree of sadness, frustration, or loss, as you will hear from our panel discussion, I'm sure, this evening, often accompanies a healthy, natural response to the difficulties of living with cystic fibrosis, and processing that is often part of a healthy acceptance of CF across the lifespan. The presence of these symptoms that you see in the right and left columns may suggest that someone is on the part of the spectrum involving mental health complications like clinical depression or anxiety. So the purpose here of using these terms is not to assign negative labels, but to guide decision-making for the appropriate intervention. So the more distress and demand, typically the more resources and support are needed to be effective and helpful. And so looking at symptoms always involves the broader context of how often this is happening, how severe or intense this is impacting a person, how long it's going on, and how it impairs other important parts of life. So intervention may be needed or is often needed and indicated when mental health may negatively impact overall health. People with chronic conditions, not just CF, and their caregivers are at higher risk for mental health complications because of these added demands. The International Depression Epidemiological Study, more easily known as TIDES, screened over 6,000 teens and adults with CF, 4,000 caregivers across the US and Europe, and concluded that people with CF and caregivers experience depression and anxiety at rates 2 to 3 times higher than the general population. Obviously, this is before COVID, and you'll see what I mean a little bit later. Teens of parents with elevated depression and anxiety scores are 2 times more likely to also have clinical symptoms. And people with the presence of clinical anxiety are at least 9 times more likely to experience depression. So I don't tell you all of that because you have to hold all of these numbers. But again, we see that kind of circular relationship between many of these influencing factors. So untreated depression, anxiety, or both can interfere with a person's ability to take care of themselves or a child. So people with untreated symptoms specific to CF are less likely to manage their treatment effectively, may have worse lung function or lower BMI, experience more hospitalization and related healthcare costs, or experience a lower quality of life. And even a mild score on the PHQ-9, which is the screener that we use, it's a 9-question screener that we use to detect these clinical symptoms. So even a mild score is shown to be statistically correlated with a higher rate of pulmonary decline. So it's important to talk about mental health because even if you're on the spectrum experiencing these symptoms, maybe you don't meet the criteria for a diagnosis, but it's likely and possible that it may be impacting your overall health or just simply how you take care of yourself every day. And I just want to mention here too, this is not covered in the mental health care guidelines for CF yet. But ADHD is another mental health complication, a neurobiological disorder that is more prevalent in CF. It's maybe less talked about or known, but in the general population, it affects about 5% of people. But prospective studies in the US, which are more reliable, suggest a prevalence of as high as 21%. So I simply share that because things like having a hard time remembering or staying organized or hyperactivity in a child, these things can make care more difficult as well. So the care guidelines, this is a stepped model of care. And what that basically means is that no matter where you fall on the mental health spectrum, that there is help and opportunity. So this is good news. And so this bubble here at the top that you see is the part of prevention, education, being part of community where we're having these discussions, and these kinds of things benefit everyone. That the guidelines recommend annual screening for individuals 12 and over, and then we use that screening information to make some of those decisions. So you can see here that people in the elevated range, which moderate and severe, are going to be more in that spectrum of clinical complications. You can see there's a recommendation for further assessment, and this is where treatment or referral to a mental health coordinator like myself, that's the role that I serve at my center, or to a professional in the community may be appropriate. And so all of this takes in consideration, your personal context for the situation, your individual preferences, and this is just all an important part of decision making. Caregiver screening is recommended as well. That's something that we offer as a self-screening process at our center. Okay, so Molly talked about COVID. It's one of those things that we're all so tired of hearing about. And at the same time, how can we not acknowledge, how this has impacted all of us? So I really share this slide, which shows the weekly average that adults were experiencing clinical symptoms of depression and anxiety, or both, across May, June, and July of 2020. So if I were to draw a line, you could see that, this is increasing. And I really share this to say that we discussed this as a team at our care center about ourselves, and to suggest that no one is immune to mental health complications. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we're going to have more conversation on our panel, but I want to acknowledge that CF modulators have changed what CF care looks like and how it's experienced. And so with new hope, as is so often, there's kind of two sides to that coin. Sometimes are ushered in new challenges. And what I'm reflecting on here are really the kind of observed psychosocial impacts of modulators, not the clinical indications. And you'll hear more about that from our panel. And I'm keeping an eye on the time, but I just briefly want to share with you that the CF Foundation is focusing resources on further research in mental health and CF. So this is exciting. You can keep track of this on their website. You can see here that mental health is an area that's encouraged. I'm a part of the CF Foundation's Mental Health Advisory Committee, and we mental health. And some examples of opportunity included in that document are things like looking further at the impact of treatment burden on mental health, the development of CF-specific screening tools, looking more closely at the effects of modulators on mental health outcomes in higher risk groups, so persons of color or individuals with CF in the LGBT community, or other mental health complications like ADHD, for example. So this draft has already gone out to the public once, so it's not a secret, but if anyone is involved in community voice, or if you're not, this is an opportunity to provide feedback, to kind of represent your own journey in CF. And so this will go back out to community voice for feedback, I believe, over the summer months. So it'd be great if you were interested to look for that and be ready to share your input. Okay, I think I am going to, so these are the services available at our center, which I've kind of alluded to through the STEP model. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I want to get to our panel, and at the end, I will circle back and share a couple of these resource slides as well. Okay, so I think now I'm going to stop sharing and just invite our panel to come on screen. It's still screen sharing.
And I just wanted to add, Caroline lost her connection. She'll be right back with us. So we'll save her for last on our introduction.
Okay, great. Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, so Danielle, I think you gave us a great preface for each of our panel members, and I want to go ahead and dive into some discussion, which I expect will be the highlight of the evening. And I want to mention as we hear from our group that every person's experience in CF is different and unique. I anticipate, though, with our group here that you'll likely find some commonality in your own story. So I just alluded to the stress and the increased mental health demands over the course of the pandemic. And Andy, I'm interested to hear from you. What has been the hardest part of COVID over this past year for you? And what are one or two key things that have helped you to cope?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here amongst the panel. So I guess the toughest part for me is being a dad and a husband and having cystic fibrosis and putting that, I feel like there's added pressure to the rest of my family because I'm high risk. And we have to do certain things to be very careful. And everything's a little tighter for us. And in the world of social media, where my children, who are both, one's a teenager, one's almost a teenager, they see their friends and some of them are able to do things that they can't. So that's obviously, those are some of the difficult things. Obviously myself, not being able to go to the gym. I haven't gone to the, I have a gym at home, but it's not the same as going to a gym with my trainer and all that. I haven't done that in a year. But honestly, compared to what some people have had to deal with, it's probably little things. But as far as how I cope, I don't want to pretend that this is easy and coping it's not that hard. It's difficult. Some of the things I do that's therapeutic is I write. I write down what my feelings are, what I'm going through, or some of the other things. I have a therapist. I talk to my therapist. I also have a separate psychiatrist. I talk to my psychiatrist, but I try to, and I talk to my wife, we have open conversations about it and, but regardless of how much you cope, it's difficult. But one of the things I see, and not that you asked this, but if you did, I would say one of the things of the positive of COVID is I've been able to do my treatments for a little bit longer, because I'm at home anyway. So I pay more attention to my health when I'm here. So that's the one bright side, is that I really do try to spend more time doing my treatments, and I spend more time working out in my home gym and running and that kind of thing. But as far as coping, I think therapy has been really something that's really helped in being open with my support system.
Thank you, Andy. And I'll reference this a little bit later as we close, but one of our resources is something called the CF Warrior Project, which is a book that Andy put together. It's a collection of stories that really demonstrate tons of human resilience and is really a community in itself. So Caroline, I see that you're back with us. Yay. So I'm curious to hear, I know that you are employed, and I'm curious to hear what you would say has been the hardest part of this past year, and those kind of key things that have really helped you kind of make it through.
Hey, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? I'm having some connection issues. Okay, great. So yes, Shayna, I think the hardest part, honestly, is just staying at home, being extra super cautious about obviously going out in public and whatnot. But the caveat to that is that I have been asking for several years to be able to work from home on a full-time basis because of CF. And, it wasn't allowed at the time when I asked, simply because, it was one of those things where if they allowed me to do it, then they would have to allow other people to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. But we've gotten to a point where they've gotten, and I'm just talking about my, the local area in general, 8,000 people working from home within a 2-week time frame. And so they have proven that they can do it. And it has been a tremendous benefit to me. I have been healthier than I ever have been in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. I didn't really have a lot of pulmonary issues until the last 5 or 6 years. I initially had pancreatic issues throughout my childhood and adolescence. And it wasn't until about 6 years ago that I started experiencing pulmonary issues. So the fact that I have gone over a year without a hospitalization is incredible. Now I did end up having, sinus surgery back in November, but that has just been it's been amazing to me. And I know there are a lot of people saying it's such an inconvenience to have to be able to, to adapt. And people, my friends and family that don't have CF and they're having issues adapting to being able, so limited in doing things. And it's such a nuisance for them. But to me, it's been a lifesaver, literally. I never, let's put it this way. I have accrued vacation time then I can actually take a vacation this year because
Yay. How
yeah,
exciting is that?
because it's just not happened in the last 5 years. And so my husband and I are looking forward to actually taking a vacation and when this all passes. And that in and of itself, to be able to step back and just decompress from work, because I am very grateful to have a full-time job and be able to have a full-time job. So, but that brings its own stresses. And so to know that I have a vacation to look forward to is great. And working from home has allowed me to accomplish that. So that's
Yeah.
been the outlook for me. It's COVID is definitely, it stinks, obviously, but to me, it's brought something that I never thought was going to happen.
Yeah, Carolyn, I just heard almost verbatim what you're describing from someone yesterday afternoon, and an adult just talking about, how much easier it has been to manage health from home. But certainly there are, kind of two sides to that coin too. And I know just kind of more broadly, during the pandemic, there has been much discussion and normalization of grief. And we know too, though, that in the CF community, that grief is not a new experience. And I am curious, really just thinking about Meg and her journey as a new mom and having a young child with CF at the, close to the beginning of a pandemic. So Meg, the next question is for you. What has this looked like you in terms of kind of processing grief and loss, or, maybe the side of being able to be home with your young child, but what has this been like for you as a new mom?
Yeah, as Danielle alluded to when she opened up for me, our family kind of got thrown into the metaphorical deep end of cystic fibrosis with having our son was born in February of last year, at the dawn of a global pandemic. So, and then we had a hospitalization when he was 1 month old. So it was just kind of like a rolling snowball. And, people talk about the diagnosis, any sort of diagnosis like CF for a family is very isolating. And to experience the isolation in literal isolation, it was really hard. And I didn't realize how important it is for people to see you and to feel seen until a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. My therapist looked at me it was virtual in the camera, and she very lovingly said, "No one is seeing you, Meg." And I just burst into tears. And it was that moment that I realized how important it was to me, and I didn't even know. Nobody was able to come over to our house and see us doing chest PT on Sid, or, watch us fight to get the enzymes with the applesauce into his mouth. Nobody saw our family experiencing that. And so our only interactions were virtual, or, we would do like a Google Duo call during treatment or something, but people just didn't get to experience it alongside us. And so they didn't really know how to communicate with us about it. And it's already hard for people to know how to communicate when they haven't gone through something. But I read this book that was really helpful to me, and it's called It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. And it really opened my eyes because she talks about how grief is so scary to us as a society. All we want to do is fix it and cure it. And because we love that person, we want them to feel better. But the truth is that it never goes away. And it seems so counterintuitive for that to be a relief, but it was such a relief for me to learn that. And I kind of think of it, I've explained this a few times, like strength training. And in the beginning of, you first get the diagnosis, it's this like heavy, it's like putting a heavy boulder on top of someone who's like never lifted a weight, and it just fully crushes you. And you think, I can never stand up again. And then over time, every day you still are holding this thing and you just get stronger and stronger. And so in the beginning, when people wouldn't know what to say, they would try to make me feel better or say something hopeful or say, but the advances in the community are so wonderful. And, but isn't this a silver lining here or something? And it would just, I would say, I'm carrying this really heavy thing. I can't accept that right now. It doesn't feel true to me. But over this last year, I feel like I've gotten so much stronger and been able to carry it so much more. And I know that it's never going to go away, but I've changed and I'm able to do more. So I feel like I can now hold that hope more easily. Whereas before I was being so burdened by the grief, over time, being able to interact with people more, with the vaccines and everything, being able to have people see us, the grief isn't as heavy all the time. So I can hold that hope too. And that's just been so much. I never saw myself getting to the point where I am now a year ago when he was first born. We were in the hospital. And now here, if I heard myself say what I'm saying now to myself, then I would have thought that person doesn't understand. So it's just been such a relief to be able to grow.
Yeah. I love hearing these metaphors that you're pulling from. I frequently use the example of building muscle in therapy, that the therapy is building emotional muscle. And when we use and learn these new ways of coping, and you're talking about having these conversations with your therapist and reading materials and learning and growing, that builds our resilience muscle. We all have a resilience muscle that helps us to, as we get stronger, to meet those demands. So thank you for painting that picture for us. And I hear you that it's important to have room. And for those who support you, to give you room for acknowledging, yes, the hope and the grief, and that both of those are valid, and neither one minimizes the other. And so I'm curious. So Erin is further along in this process with her son Caleb, and I am curious, what is this like for you, Erin, to kind of hear Meg talk about her early grief experience, and what does this look like for you now, further down the road?
I'm not sure I could say it any better than Meg did. That was amazing. And as she was talking, I was thinking about how it's not only the parent that is carrying that burden, that load, but everyone around you is also grappling with that new heavy thing. And some of them get to decide that they don't want to build the muscle. Some of them get to decide that it's too much. And, they're early on for us as we were grappling with all the things and learning just exactly what we were dealing with. There was a lot of support. But over the last decade, it's a lot. It's a thing that never goes away. And there are folks that just decide that it's too much for them, and they either move to a more superfluous role in your life, or, you know, kind of dwindle away a little bit. But the good thing is that the ones that stay become your life's blood. They become a real and true support system. And I have had the experience of being, now a decade later, somewhat surprised at who has stayed, who has hung in there with us and built that muscle, and done the small and large things that mean so much on this journey with us. Large in that they show up for us every year at great strides, and they are in it for the long haul. And small, just a text message, you know, how are you guys dealing with all this COVID stuff? You know, you don't really realize how truly wonderful those true friends are until you are in a lifelong battle, and they hang in there with you. So I love that metaphor, and I think it applies to a lot of people, not just the parents, when this new diagnosis happens.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing from you, Erin, is that on the one hand, you know, community is absolutely necessary. And there's so much, there's a huge body of evidence to tell us that connection is a big buffer in, you know, kind of warding off some of those mental health complications like depression, or that it is a very important component in your overall health. And at the same time, you know, CF impacts not just an individual, but a whole family, potentially a whole community. And I often hear from individuals with CF that they are very aware and sensitive to how CF impacts their family members, and may be unsure how to speak up about the emotional support that they need. So I want to shift back to Andy and Caroline, and maybe Andy, you can take your turn first, but you know, what does it look like for you to learn to navigate and speak up about how CF impacts you emotionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as navigating how to speak up mental and emotionally, the emotional side is so important. I just don't want to understate it. I give the analogy of a pitching coach. You know, even the greatest pitcher in the world has had a pitching coach. You know, they need someone to talk to and to express their feelings. And you know, there are a lot of studies that have shown that mental health is just as important as your physical health, maybe even more so. So you know, for example, when you go to work out, you know, if you're not in the right frame of mind, it's hard to work out. And the same thing applies with CF, to do your therapies and take your meds. If you're not motivated, you have to do this thing every single day. It's hard. You got to be in the right frame of mind. And so I would just say, you know, I'm a big fan of when things are tough, you really need to open up and to make sure that you cope. You know, as we talked about earlier, coping is so important with any type of, I don't want to say mental illness, but with any type of mental issue that you're dealing with. And just know that if you do have a problem and you're outward about it, if you get it out there, that's not a weakness, that's a strength. You know, to know that you have an issue and to go out and be open about it. And so what I've found is, you know, through interviewing people through the CF Warrior Project, not to float that out there, but just to say, a lot of the people that are in the book or have been the last couple of books have been very open, very transparent about mental illness and mental health, and to talk about it. Because they say to be transparent is so important, because it really takes a lot of the pressure off. For those of you who know, a secret is so hard to keep. It hurts inside, like it makes it so hard. As far as anxiety, you know, I deal with anxiety a lot of times, and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between CF and anxiety, because both of them make it hard to breathe. So if you can really cope with one, if you can help the anxiety side, the CF side gets a little bit easier to deal with. So I would just say that they both kind of go hand in hand. You know, if you can deal with the mental side, it makes CF a little bit easier. And so therefore, yeah, I mean, I hopefully I answered your question, but really
Yeah.
they both work well together. You got to be able to do one to do the other, and it goes on both sides.
Yeah. Opening up is what I hear. And you're making me think, Andy, about, we're talking about mental health and its relationship to cystic fibrosis. And we know that there are other life challenges, that still happen. And
Yeah.
what I hear from people, or, I work with people with CF and their families, is sometimes they may be dealing with a mental health complication for someone else in their family, or they may be touched by it in a different way, or even acting as a caregiver in a different capacity. So, Caroline, I want to shift the question for you a little bit, because Andy kind of made me think about this, but I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what you've learned about that connection, specifically for you, that relationship between what's happening in your physical health, how that impacts you emotionally, or vice versa.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I did not know, honestly, until I connected with the Emory Adult CF Clinic, really, that CF could affect your mental health. I grew up in Rhode Island in the late 70s, early 80s, and a very small chapter. We just didn't have the support and maybe the educational information to put it out there. And I realized that I went through a very long hospitalization towards the end of my college career that even I didn't recognize it at the time. And it wasn't now in reflection, I look back that I was struggling mentally after that hospitalization. It honestly affected my entire career path, from going from, nursing to, I did graduate with my degree in nursing, but I'm no longer on that path. And I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't have the resources. So now that looking back and, reflecting on it, I'm very much open to telling people, and that's kind of my goal, is to say that it's okay to talk about it and to be able to provide resources and whatnot. But I, I know that if I'm getting irritable and I know hospitalizations and of themselves, because of side effects of medications and just not sleeping, the schedule of, that's when it really starts to affect me. If I get, right now, if I get stressed with work and stuff like that, it can slowly kind of take its toll, and I kind of have to step back and look at the big picture. And, but honestly, just having this conversation tonight, I feel like is a huge step forward, because I want people and parents and caregivers of every CF patient to know that the help is available. And it's, don't be ashamed to ask for it. However you need to go about doing it. But yeah, absolutely. Just ask for that help, whether it's reaching out to Andy or myself, or to someone that's, I'm happy to share my story. And it's difficult and it's too much to share in one evening tonight, but knowing that I've gone through it and I had to go through it the hard way, if that can bring some hope to other families, then I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Caroline, you were kind of the energy and the advocate for an event like this. So I hear you that it's been a long road, and there was a time that you didn't have the tools that you have now. And just so I'm glad that you're here and you're talking about it, and that we in this community have had the benefit of the lessons you've learned and the resilience that you clearly demonstrate. So I want to shift here. I mentioned in the presentation that we would make a little bit of time to talk about modulators, and I know each of you has a slightly different modulator experience. I'm also looking at the time, so being mindful, but I think it'd be great to hear from each person on, what has it meant to be on a modulator? How has that affected your outlook your emotional health. And then Caroline, I might touch on you last because I know that right now you are someone who's not eligible. So Meg, maybe we'll start with you on the spectrum of having a newer baby. What is this like for you to how have modulators kind of impacted your experience?
So Sydney is in a trial currently, actually, for Orkambi. So it's only approved for ages 2 and up, and he is currently 14 months. So we were so excited to just slip into. Choa had 2 slots, and we got 1. We were so excited. He's too young right now for us to really notice any big changes since he's been on it. But as I'm sure many people on this call know, medical trials are really no joke. You know, it's so time intensive. There's so many tests. It's a heavy burden, even though we are so excited to have the opportunity. And the hard part of it is worth that opportunity. So we decided to do it, but we actually had kind of a hard experience a couple of weeks ago with blood draws. You know, they have to do 2 in a day, and you're there for 8 hours, and he's too young to explain to him what's happening, and they couldn't get his blood, and they had to stick him like 4 times, and it was extremely traumatic. And my husband and I started to wonder, should we pull out of this trial? Is this too burdensome? Because there's a lot of talk about anxiety about doctor's visits, and are we making this too hard for him? But then I actually got in touch with an acquaintance from years ago. This woman dated my husband's friend in college, and she has CF, and we knew at the time, but we never talked about it. But we recently connected right after this appointment happened, and she was telling me about how she was I didn't even tell her about our bad experience, but she told me how she was in all these trials and she was so proud of it. And I started to realize that Sid's going to feel that way when he gets older, and it's going to be, I think, the burden of him going through these tests now and experiencing this struggle, he's going to be able to look back and say, I helped other people and I contributed to this amazing thing that's been happening in this community. And looking at that makes us realize, like, we want him to stay in it even though it's hard. Like, his life is going to have a lot of hard stuff to do, and it's going to make him so strong, and he's going to be so proud that he did it. So I wasn't planning to share all of that, but
Yeah, thank you I can sense the emotionality in that, that it means a lot to you. And Erin, what about you guys?
Well, before I talk about Kaleido, I want to say to Meg, as an encouragement, it used to take 2 people to hold Caleb down to even just get a throat culture. And now when he has to have a blood draw, he just throws his arm out there like, do it. It's not a big deal. So hopefully that will be Sid's story too. I am continually amazed at my own child's courage. When Caleb was born, Kaleido was still called VX770, and it was still in the trial phases. So I watched it really, really closely because he has one of the mutations that they were thinking it might be helpful for, and kind of some ups and downs. And yes, it was going to be approved for his mutation. No, it wasn't going to be approved for his mutation. And then finally in 2012, it was. And when he was 5 years old, he got to start taking Kaleido, and it was actually April the 17th. And so just recently, it was my memory on Facebook was the pictures of him taking that first dose of Kaleido. So it's kind of cool we get to talk about it tonight. And when he was old enough, when he turned 6, he was really close to a hospitalization, all the reasons. And he started taking the full dose of Kaleido, and it was like the problems kind of disappeared. So we saw immediately the impact that it was having on him. He hopefully will get to start taking Trikafta this summer, and he just had a clinic appointment this past Monday, and things are again in that moment where we're like, maybe it's time for a tune-up. Maybe, things aren't looking so great. And I just keep remembering what Kaleido did all those years ago, and am hoping and praying that Trikafta has the same impact, because there's just no doubt that it is having a tremendous impact on our community. And I hope it will have the same impact on my child. Of course, as his mom, I worry about the things like, what are his liver enzymes going to do? And is it really, going to be safe for him to be on this medication starting at age 11 for the rest of his life, or until the next best thing comes along? Like, what positive impact will it have, but also what potential negative impact can it have? You can't help but wonder what all that will equal out to. But at the end of the day, the gratitude, I just finished reading this book called Breath from Salt. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's our story, the CF story, and just the parents and the grandparents and the CFers that just would not quit until they got the next piece of information and the next breakthrough and the next big funding. It's just the gratitude that we now get to reap the benefits of all of that. There are just no words for it. It's tremendous. It's the thing that allows me to sleep at night, that these kinds of things are on the horizon and already here.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin. And so Andy and Caroline, I know it might be really challenging, but giving us a picture of what modulators have meant for you in maybe 1 to 2 minutes, so we can have time to share resources before we close.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, Andy, jump
I'll
in.
be quick. I will say I've been on both sides of it. When Kaleido came out, or Combis, Symdeco, I wasn't eligible for any of those. And I was really excited for the CF community, but deep down I was envious and kind of a little disappointed, that I wasn't going to get that. And I feel bad saying that, because no one wants to say they're envious of anything, but yeah, that was difficult. But I will say, it's helped me, and I'll tell you why it's helped me, because I'm on Trikafta now. It's been great for me. My lung function's gone up about 15 percentile, my FEV1, so that's been awesome. But at the same time, while I'm breathing better, I'm not coughing nearly as much, and I can do things athletically and have more energy. It's awesome. But it's made me realize that there's people on the other side, like Caroline, that aren't eligible yet. And we have to keep working to getting to making sure we are 100% eligible. We get everybody on here to get it, that we get everybody with CF to have some type of CFTR modulator that they are eligible for. And I will continue to fight for that. And I hope everyone else will too. That's kind of what I wanted to share.
So Andy, as we actually had a question come in, and so while I have you here, I'm gonna pitch this one to you, because this is someone with 2 sons diagnosed as teenagers in their late adolescence with CF. One of them specifically is experiencing quite a bit of emotional distress, but having a hard time kind of opening up about that, talking about that as a young man with CF, and this being new to him. So her question really is, any thoughts, feedback that you might have on opening that conversation or supporting him?
Yeah, I would just say, just allow nature to take its course. I mean, you can't force it. I was very quiet about my CF growing up. I didn't start really talking about it, believe it or not, till after college, because I didn't want to feel different from everybody else. I didn't want pity. I didn't want people to look at me differently. I didn't want to feel alienated. But there comes a point in your life that you just finally realize, hopefully, that you want to be an advocate and that you want to make a difference, and that you realize it's less important that you look different to somebody else. It's more important to make a difference for somebody else. So that's what I would say, is just let nature take its course, and if they want to talk about it, don't make CF taboo. Don't live in a bubble, all that kind of stuff. They want to talk about it, be open about talking about it, and be real. Being real, by the way, doesn't mean you have to be negative about anything. You just, you find a way to talk about it and communicate, and that's it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, what I hear you're kind of talking about, or connecting, like finding that thing that's really meaningful, like that source of motivation for, if I really want to do this thing that's important to me, help others, or, whatever that might be for someone else. that sometimes that's the avenue for creating some opportunities to deal with it. So
It'll
thank
come
you.
with time. It'll come with time. Yeah.
And okay, so Caroline, your minute to tell us about, what it's like to hear all this amazing stuff about modulators and kind of still be waiting.
Yeah, I can literally sum it up in a minute. It's not a cure. So, I'm not eligible, though I will say I was just contacted about potentially participating in a study about with the CF, Emory CF, about expanding Trikafta to other mutations. So I'm hoping, work and life allows me to be able to participate in that study. However, it's not a cure. And as much as I'm, disappointed, of course, about not being eligible, I'm so grateful for the quality of life that, people like Andy and other people. I think about the stories that I've heard of people being on lung transplant lists and then now all of a sudden not having to be. And the fact that this medication is out there, I can't help but be happy for everyone that's being able to take it. But like I said, in the back of my mind also, I pray that it continues to work for all these people and that maybe one day I will be eligible. But at the end of the day, we need to find a cure, because there are so many factors that could change, whether it be Orkambi, Kalydeco, Trikafta. There's no guarantee, there's no assurance that it's going to continue to work. And really the only option is to find a cure.
And I hear you. I don't know if this is, you meant to allude to this or not, but I'm going to put this in there. But with that not being a cure, that the other therapies that we have are still a very important part of the overall equation too. So, okay, so I'm going to switch here to mention a couple of our resources, and then I'll share with, or kind of hand it back over to Danielle to close us. But I just want to say to you that this is why I love working in CF. I always learn so much from you in events like this. I mentioned this already, but just your incredible resilience, which is not the absence of difficulty or hardship, not the absence of, probably periods of depression or anxiety or, acute or chronic stress. But just that you are here, that you're acknowledging your experience, putting words to what you've experienced, being brave enough to open up and say it to someone, your openness to support. And you are, examples of people who are actively, finding ways to move through these challenges. So, and I know that this is only one of the ways that each of you contributes to the community. So thank you so much. And I'm going to move here to share my screen again. Okay, I'm just going to move quickly. Okay, here we go. So I mentioned resources available at our Atlanta Center. Of course, if you are watching from Florida or from joining us from another chapter, please reach out to your CF Center. But I'm happy to hear from people and that are receiving care at our center directly. So please feel free to reach out. And then I want to mention too that we have a caregiver support group that we had that today. It's the third Tuesday of every month. So again, if you are a parent, reach out. This is a place for authentic community, a very candid, open conversation, and community that wants to support. Okay, and I already mentioned CF Warrior Project. CFF.org has plenty of content online for emotional wellness, the Peer Connect program. Okay, so I know I'm running through this pretty quickly, but Danielle, I will turn it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Someone said in the chat that this has been a time very well spent, and I could not agree anymore. Thank you to the panelists and to Shayna for spending your evening with us and doing such a meaningful presentation for our community. I will be sending this presentation out. We recorded it. So we will send this out in an email tomorrow. So look for that in your inbox if you want to rewatch the event or share it with family members. Feel free to do that. And I'll also include Shayna's slide deck and the resources so that you have everything in one easy spot. So look for that tomorrow. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the chapter and we will be happy to help. Thank you all for being here tonight. Have a good evening.